Hello, Profit Hackers. I'm Jeremy Lott, the Chief Visionary for Foundation Accounting and Consulting. I owned a construction company for about 15 years before making a change to accounting because my accountants sucked. My goals are to simplify accounting for construction company owners, fuel your profits, level up your cash flow, and help you grow in a financially responsible way. So let's go. Hello and welcome back to the Contractors Profit Hack Show. I'm Jeremy Lott with Foundation Accounting and Consulting, and I am here to continue our conversation about bidding, right? So I'm going to go back over the 4 steps every time, the beginning and end of these shows. But the first step is we bid a process, and we talked about that in the last episode. Today, what we're going to talk about is the second step, which is determining the costs, right? Number 3 is you want to mark up your costs. And then number 4 is you are going to want to compare your price to the market, okay? So I have a story for you from my scouting days. I enjoyed scouts largely because I pushed really, really hard in the first little bit and got my eagle right before I turned 14. So I did all the hard work right up front and then could just go on the campouts and play and do whatever activities I wanted at the different week-long camps or whatever. So I had a lot of fun in scouts throughout the years. And we had a leader, and this leader was in the military, and he was very, very intense about scouting. And he would take us on these hikes, and we would go for hours and hours, and it would get dark, and we would have problems finding our way back. And so there was one year for our week-long summer camp that we were all sitting around the campground and doing different, little activities, carving stuff with knives and throwing knives at the ground. The kind of stuff that young boys do when they are given a bunch of free time and sharp objects. Anyway, so we're all sitting around, and this particular leader came up and he said, "All right, let's go on a hike." Well, being one of the older kids in the troop and knowing better, several of us snuck off to go hide in the forest while he was gathering up the people to go on the hike, right? So the only kids that were left were all the younger kids that didn't really know better because they hadn't had the experiences yet, right? So they took off that night or that afternoon and started hiking up in the mountains. And dark came around and they weren't home. And the early morning hours came around and they weren't home. And the other leaders in the campground were panicking, and they were trying to go up the trail and shout and see if they could figure out where they were. Well, we found out the next morning that they had hiked up, and then when they started to hike back, they went down this trail and ended up coming down a sheer cliff with a huge drop and ended up getting rim-rocked. Now, what rim-rocked means is that you hit a point when you're climbing where you can't go up and you can't go down. You're stuck. You're just stuck where you're at, right? And that's where they were. And they were there all night long. Well, we got people in to help them. And when it was light, they could see their way a little bit better. And we got them back to safety. Nobody was hurt. A couple of the younger kids were a little shaken, but they were okay. They were never really panicked or anything. But the reason that I bring this story up is because when I go into a new adventure, whether it's a business opportunity or whether it's going on a hike, I want to know what the costs are in order to be able to accomplish that goal, right? I want to know what it's going to cost me. Well, back then, I knew that the cost was going to be a long hike, and I love the burn and I love being out in nature, so I had no problem with that cost. But I also knew that he often got lost and often would be stuck out into late in the night. And so that cost was not worth it to me. But the point here is I wanted to know ahead of time what the costs were for doing that, right? So we're going to go back to the bidding process. We have put together our steps in doing an install, right? Or doing maintenance, either way. Now that we have each of those steps listed out, we want to know what our costs are that are associated with each of those steps, right? So as we started earlier, we talked about an electrician and a bidding process, and the installation process for them. So if we go back to the very beginning, the first step that we had was to order parts, right? So what costs are going to be associated with that step? Well, we're going to have our material, right? And then we're also going to have the labor hours for accomplishing that, right? Well, there's something else that we're going to talk about in a couple episodes, or actually in the next episode, and that is our overhead. So we spoke earlier about everything that goes on the truck to the job site, right? Well, the direct costs are very easy to figure into a job. It's the overhead or these indirect costs that also go on the truck to the job site that are harder to figure into our pricing. So in the next episode, we're going to talk about how to include those and be able to cover those with our bids and make sure that we are paying for those costs as part of our bid, right? But we'll go back. So we have our labor and materials, and then we're going to have some overhead that we have to throw onto that, right? And then when we come down to the next line for scheduling, how long is it going to take that person to schedule that crew to go do the work? How long is it going to take to be able to get the permitting and other things that are necessary to be able to do that job? And then we have some other direct costs associated with that, right? Like our permit. So we want to go through and figure out all of our direct costs, and then we're going to add our indirect or overhead costs to that process, that line item in the process, that step in the process, to help us be able to figure out how much it's actually going to cost us to complete that step in our process, right? So we're going to start at the top, and we're going to go down one step at a time through our process and figure out all of our costs on each step in the process, right? So that's a little bit about how we're going to manage our costs and be able to know ahead of time what it's going to cost us to do a job and make sure that we're not missing anything when we're putting our bid together. Okay? So thank you very much for joining us. Again, those 4 steps we're working on. Number 1, we bid a process. Number 2, we're going to figure out our costs for each step in that process. Number 3, we are going to do a markup on those. And number 4, we are going to then compare it back to the market so we can make sure that we're comfortable with the price that we're giving to the customer. All right? So thank you very much, and I will see you guys next episode. Thanks for listening. If you found this episode helpful, please like and subscribe for weekly episodes to help you fuel your profit, level up your cash flow, and finance your growth. Until next time, go enjoy some green M&Ms and protect that cash.